Welcome to the Macon Atlanta podcast. I'm your host, Brent Macon. Our guest today is Andrew McConnell. He is the CEO of Alively, which is focused on Healthspan and extending our healthy years. He's also an author. He wrote Get Out of My Head. It's applying Stoic philosophy to modern living. And if you are someone who wants to live well, who wants to be in control of your mind state, who wants to maximize, the value and the positivity in your days, this is a masterclass for you. And Andrew has practical tips about how to live well. He's got certain mantras, certain ways of living, ways of being that he educates us on. And I learned a ton. It was really reinforcing of a lot of things that I've been reading about and thinking about. So again, I think you'll enjoy this episode if you're somebody who is trying to be more in control of your mind state, especially in this era when we're so overloaded with technology and things competing for our attention. So Andrew, thank you for the time. Enjoy the episode. Without further ado, here's an episode with Andrew McConnell. Andrew, thank you for joining, taking the time meeting today.
Brent, it is great to be here. I appreciate the flexibility.
I'd love to start with Stoic philosophy and what Stoicism means to you, how you got here. Can you start at the beginning around Stoic philosophy and what that's meant to you?
Yeah. So, I think there are many layers to this. So one, I think most people, when they hear Stoic or Stoicism, they think lowercase s, like, oh, they're Stoic. They have no emotions. They're cold-faced. They're stone cold. And I would differentiate that from Stoicism with a capital S, which is the philosophy from ancient Greece and Rome, which is this idea, I think at its essence, that there's certain things that we can control and other things that we can't. And the things that we can control are basically our mindset, how we react, how we perceive things, and everything else ultimately is outside of our control. And it's very similar to the serenity prayer, right? And it's funny, right? I wrote the book that has Stoic in the title with Stoic wisdom. But I wanted to go with ancient wisdom because I don't think there's a single philosophy that has a monopoly on truth. And I think there are a lot of the principles, and this is the kind of great life work that I eventually want to do, which is, and I have an ongoing notes tab where like I see something, I pull it in, I'm like, okay, this is fantastic from Judaism or Christianity or Hinduism or whatever that carries through on Stoicism, on Taoism, on all these areas that I don't think it was an accident around 2,000, 2,500 years ago. Seneca, Epictetus, Socrates, Lao Tzu, the Buddha, some, even earlier Judaism started saying very similar things. And I think it's because they're innate human truths. And you think about the human Homo sapien as a species around for 250,000 years and what that environment was like for 245,000 to 248,000 of those years was pretty similar. There wasn't a ton of innovation in how we lived and everything. And then in the last 2,000 to 5,000 years, you got more civilization. You got people moving into cities. You dealt with different problems, not a lion's going to jump out and eat you.
Sure.
For most people. And so I think whether you were in ancient China, you were in ancient Greece, wherever you were, your brain wasn't adapted for the world you were actually living in. And it creates all sorts of mental health problems. And you go read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. You go read some of the stuff. You go read, the one I'd love to go back to is the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu is just eternal. And you're like, wow, this could have been written this week as a blog post. Like this is so resonant with what's in my head right now and what I'm dealing with. And I think it's because that was the first time relatively in human civilization you were dealing with that environment and then had the space to actually think about it and override some of those biological triggers. So that was a pretty long-winded way of saying what Stoicism is. But the Stoicism as a philosophy is that ancient Greek Roman philosophy that has that principle. And there are different manifestations of it. But I think once you dig into it, there's very little that you can say, oh, that is not true. Right? It's kind of this objective human truth in my mind. But of course, I would say that.
I think about all the time, I'm living in a world that I didn't evolve to live in. Like we haven't, those 250,000 years that you mentioned, like we didn't have devices pinging us in 13 different directions, and we didn't know nearly as many people as we know now. We couldn't go everywhere. And so this overload, like we're not built to process that. And it helps me have grace with that, but it doesn't make it any easier necessarily on the day to day. Like on the Stoicism specifically, like what are some of those tenets that you point to as, oh, this is human truth? Like what are some of the most important things you've taken from it?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest is that differentiating what's in our control and what's not. So like it, depending on what's top of mind for me, right? It's a recency effect. It was like, oh, this is the important one. But I think about right now very much process versus results. And we can control our process, what actions we take, what we put into it. We can't control the ultimate outcome. And I mean, this is the same, whether it's Stoic or it's Christianity, God, thy will be done. It's the same thing. Like, hey, I have to release the ultimate end product. Now, that's not saying I'm abdicating. I'm not going to vote because it's, God will be done, like whoever it is. Like, no, God helped create this world that I can go vote. So let me go act and do the things I can. But once I do the things I can, I have to release the results. And to me, the best modern example of this was, I guess it was like 2 years ago, year and a half ago with Djokovic, when he lost to Alcaraz in the Wimbledon final. And he was heartbroken, right? He was crying, his kids in the stand. And he said, I did everything I could. Like I worked as hard as possible. I gave it my all today and it went his way. And I also know there were years that it could have easily gone Nadal's way, it's easily gone Federer's way, and it went my way those years. And so I'm not going to beat myself up about the end result because I had the process. And then he went back, a month later, 2 months, and won the US Open. And then just like he didn't focus on the end result. He focused on, let me have the right process, because that's what leads to success. If I keep focusing on the process, I'm gonna, like, odds get to results I want, but any individual result I can't control. So that for me has been one that's really come up a lot in conversations, and for me personally, of just, I was having a conversation the other day of like, oh, with a lively, like with the business, are you hitting the milestones you had? Like the timing and all that. I said, I don't actually set milestones. Like I want up and to the right. I know the end destination, but maybe it's diluted founder logic. But I'm like, I'm confident I'm going to get there. And whether it's 5 years or 7 years or 10 years, like life's short, but life is also long. And so as long as my process each day is getting better and I'm moving more in the direction of where I know I want to be, I'm not going to get hung up on, oh, this needed to be done in this date versus a month from that date versus 4 months from that date, as long as the steps are still going.
Yeah. Are there negative thought patterns or talk tracks or anything that used to limit you that you feel like Stoicism has helped you reprogram and reset into something that better serves you?
Well, I'm not even sure if this is Stoicism as much as, again, an innate human truth or just noticing myself, but we're very narrative driven creatures and we create stories around everything. And this is why this happened. This is what's going on. And Andrew Huberman always has this line that he got from someone else, I can't even remember whom, of we don't know what someone else is thinking and feeling. Like most of the time, we don't even know what we're feeling. And so you come up with these stories on, oh, this is why the person did this thing, right? Like attribute all sorts of positive or negative reasons or anything, and realizing and stepping away from, oh wait, no, that's a story that I'm making. This is a conversation I have with my daughter all the time of, the Hamlet quote, which is one of the most Stoic quotes in, I think, all of literature of there's neither good nor bad. Our thinking makes it so. And this thing just happened. X happened. It's not this good thing. It's not this bad thing. There's like whatever the story around it is just a story we're then creating. But the only objective truth is this happened. Now, knowing that, we can start deciding what story we can tell. So an example I give, and this is one that was real raw for my daughter, was, we went through a divorce, me and my wife, and relatively amicable, but it was hurt. It was hurtful. Like it was hard. And it took me a while. And then on the back end, I was talking to my ex and my daughter. I was like, your mom gave me two of the greatest gifts of my life. And she said, well, me, right? My daughter's like, me, like, but what's the other one? I said, choosing to divorce me. Like it opened up this world I didn't know was there. And she was really upset by that. She said, no, divorce is supposed to be this really sad thing.
Your daughter was upset by that?
Yeah. It's supposed to be this really sad thing. And I said, well, you know how we talk about all the time, there isn't good or bad. We get to decide the label that we put on it. This is how I'm doing here. So is there anything more difficult or more painful in my entire life than getting only half of the time with you? No. Like that's the hardest thing I've ever gone through. But I could choose to make that the story and the focus, or I can go focus on, wait, here are all these things that we got out of it. Like, remember how we got to go to New York? Remember how we got to go visit here? Remember how we get this time just the two of us? Nobody's getting in the way. Like we get to just go play and be silly and nobody's niggling us about anything. Like these are all the things we now get to get. And so that's the story. Both are true. Both are objective truths. And the story I'm going to tell about this, because I don't want to be sad. I want to be happy. I want to enjoy my life. I want to see the positivity, is this one. And with her, it's amazing to see the progress over time. But what I also realized last time I had her here in Atlanta, she was thinking she was faulty for not defaulting to that. And
for not defaulting to which?
To the positive story, to reframing anything to this positive story. And it didn't hit me. We're driving, we're going to the dentist, and it hit me that was the story she was telling. I was like, wait a minute. You know, it took me until my 30s to even realize this was a tool in my toolkit. Like,
how old's your daughter?
She's 8. I was like, you are so far ahead of the curve that you know of this and you're using it some of the time. So don't beat yourself up. You're not perfect. It's this tool. And just knowing you have it at your access and practicing using it, you're going to get better at it. But no, there's nothing wrong. You're human, right? We're all human. We're going to default. Like you go back to the 250,000 years. What kept us alive in a very hostile environment, this weak, slow, hairless creature that's living out in the wild? Paranoia. Paranoia kept us alive. Like the rustling 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100 is a muskrat. But if we think, oh, it's probably a muskrat, and don't go to the ultimate, oh no, God, it's probably a lion. I need to do everything and protect myself. 1 out of 100 times we die. And it doesn't matter that you're right 99 out of 100. That one time you died, your genes didn't pass on. We did not get the optimist genes. We got the paranoid genes. That's what kept us surviving. And we just don't live in that environment anymore. So much of it is just recognizing where our biology falls short and what tools we have at our disposal to try to course correct.
How have you gone about trying to expose your daughter to those concepts and tenets? Is that something that you introduce her to? Do you have external resources that you're tapping into?
I mean, I definitely, Ryan Holiday did a couple of children's books, which she loves. Like she was reading those when she was 5 or 6 of, I think it was The Girl Who Would Be Free. He made Epictetus a girl, and then The Boy Who Would Be King, I think, which about Marcus Aurelius. And she loved those. So that's certainly one way. But I mean, when she was 6, 7, like driving to school at 7:30 in the morning, I'll sit there and talk to her about the hedonic treadmill. I'm like, well, okay, so you think you're going to get this and you're going to be happy. Let's go back and think about the last thing. Remember that hula hoop you really, really want? You're like, if I get that, that's going to be, and within a week, you didn't really care about the hula hoop anymore. It was another thing. And this isn't anything wrong with you. This is all of us. What I'm saying is, as a human, we think this thing is going to make us happy, and then we get it, and it will for a very short period of time, but it always goes down. And that's called the hedonic treadmill. Like you can't outrun it. We always reset. So there's no external thing that's going to get you permanently happy. It's like, well, what if you got all the toys in the world? So it still wouldn't matter because you'd have all the toys and you'd get that big boost, and maybe it'd be 2 weeks instead of 1, but you'd end up at the same place. So external things aren't going to get you. And so I used to think I was going about it way too philosophically and like hardcore. But back to Ryan Holiday, he has this book, The Daily Dad. It's like journaling prompts. And one of the prompts one day is around, you have to catch them young before they have their defenses. And we know as people enter puberty, the parts of their brains that light up from authority figures start to shut down, and the parts that light up from peer groups light up. So if you wait till you're like, oh, well, she'll at 12 or 13, she'll understand this better. She's less
she's not
receptive
listening to
it.
you then.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you have to plant these seeds. And look, it may be stuff that, and I've had podcast guests myself, that the same thing, like their parents were very far on this and they got taught this. And then in their 20s, they totally rebelled against it. But then they came back to it in their 30s. And so it's not like, oh, she's going to be the Buddha, but she has this. As long as I tell her all the time, this is your life. I led my life. I'm not telling you this is the right choice. I'm telling you this is a choice you get to make. And I know the choice I'm going to make because this is my life, but this is 100% your choice. Like how hard do you want to work in sports or school or anything? I'm not going to tell you have to go do your homework. If I have to sign a sheet, I'm only going to sign it if you do the work. But you decide, do you want to show up to school not having done the work or do it? That's your decision, which may be way too hands-off for a lot of people. But I can't live her life for her. I really want it to be her life, which I guess goes back to, it doesn't matter what I want, it matters what she wants, but I'm pretty sure she wants it to be her life too.
Are there specific practices, maybe mantras, anything that you've taken from Stoicism and put into your daily, weekly flow that's kind of a bedrock of how you move through the world in your routine?
Yeah, I mean, in the book, I have 13 different tools that I had developed over time that, again, it could be framed through Stoicism. Like Stoicism could be a launching pad for them, or you come to them other ways. But there are a few annually, at least, I go back and reassess what my personal values are and what their ranking is. And they were consistent for a while, and then they shifted in the past 12 months a little bit. I think going through a divorce, like, gets you to reassess some things. And so setting that baseline values and then using those values as a structure and framework to inform how I design my calendar. So it hit me at one point, which is so obvious. Our life is just the sum of our days. And so if you want X, Y, and Z out of life, you could think, okay, I'm going to get all that after 65 or after some time. Or how do I incorporate that into today? Because you know what? I might not have tomorrow. So like, let me make sure each day is the life that I want. And to do that, our default so much is to take what's already there and then try to tweak on the edges without asking, is what's there the right thing in the first place? What we actually want out of life. And so I go back at least once a quarter and erase my entire calendar and then build up from the bottom. Like, okay, if I want to be 8 hours in bed a night, I have 16 hours to play with. Okay, if I'm going to have 90 minutes in the gym, all right, I have 14 and a half hours to play with. If I'm going to have this amount of time with tea in the morning, undisturbed, I'm going to have no device near me from this window at night, like another off the table, because these are my values, like health, which is sleep and fitness, time with my family, like all that comes off and here's what's left. And then reassessing where I get energy, right? You think you're a McKinsey, right? So a 2x2 box, like what am I terrible at? What am I great at? What do I hate doing? What do I love doing? And like, how much of my life can I spend in that top right box, especially my professional life? And maybe it's super, super broad, but it's helping, creating, and learning, right? And what proportion of that should be in those work hours? And it can vary, right? If I have a smaller team, there's not a ton of help that I need to give to other people to get stuff done. I can do way more creating. And by the way, I need to do a lot more creating because I don't have a big team to go do it. Learning, again, like, I don't know how often you switched between industries, but every single project I did over 4 years was an entirely different industry. So the learning curve was so steep. I'd have to go in and deep learn. And I was in the same industry for 11 years and got super, super deep there. And then I completely flipped industry. So it's like, oh no, fortunately is an area that I spend a ton of my free time learning about, but it's still a different level of learning that I have to do than I had to do for the decade prior. And so that's getting overweighted now versus when we have a bigger team, probably there'll need to be more help in there to support the team to make sure they're achieving what they're capable of.
Yeah. Double clicking on the values. How'd you do that exercise? And I'm also curious how they shift.
Yeah. So the first time I even became aware of it, it wasn't even a question I asked. Tony Robbins has a book, Awaken the Giant Within. And he has that as an exercise within the book. So I did that for the first time. It then came up in another book that a slightly different way of doing it, pretty similar, called Business Outside. Is another Atlanta entrepreneur. He now lives in Boulder. I forget his name. And then my co-founder, very, very similar. He posted one. It's like a 10 or 15 minute exercise. It's just online, super easy to access. So that's the one I typically point people to because I have that URL handy. I'm like, oh, here's a way to do it. And what it is, almost all of them, it's a laundry list of words. I mean, just so many. And you kind of do a pass of which ones stick out to you. Okay, so you pull those out and then you say, okay, is there a grouping around those? And so the first time I did it, I came up with 10. Like, oh, here are my top 10 values. And then you have to go track. Like, are they really? Are these things you aspire to? Or are they things that you actually value with your actions? Are you truly valuing these? So I did 10 and tracked it for a few months. I'm like, I don't have 10 values. Like number 6 through 10, they don't even cross my mind. They never come up in a decision because it's always the top 5 that are going to weigh something out. And what I thought was number 1 is actually number 3 and moved around on that. And so what changed for me was I remember when my daughter was born, having the conversation with friends. I'm like, look, I just don't value outside relationships that much anymore. Like I'm going to give all the time to her. I mean, it's all family. It's not about outside relationships. And now I only have 50% of the time with her, and started learning a lot more about the importance of social connection on physical health, on mental health, on fighting off dementia, all this. I'm like, okay, no, that is now moving up as a value. And so as I'm designing my calendar, I'm designing how I'm going to live my life and actually living that life. That's moved up in importance as connection and not just family, right? And broadening the definition of that would be one example recently.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I went through a similar exercise at one point. It was like 70 odd values and you had to make them into columns of what's most important. And it's really weird to see like, wait a second, like integrity is important. And then you're like, it feels weird that it's in my bottom pile and right. They're all good words, right? They're all values. They're valuable, obviously in and of itself, but it's picking like, oh no, what actually matters to you? That's going to be the cut above the rest. That's going to be how you spend your time and your days. Like,
and recognizing your values, right? Because that exercise you went through, I'd be curious what % of people actually go through that exercise of what are your values? I know very few people who do it. Like, oh, I know my values. Great, articulate them. Well, I mean, no, I don't. That's why I'm asking. Like, what are your values? How do they rank? If you had to pick 3 at the cost of everything else, like, sure, you value integrity, but if it's number 14 and these other things, growth or achievement or social connection are higher, then when they're in conflict, that's what's going to ultimately win. And by the way, most of these at times are in conflict. And so 1, just going through the exercise, but then 2, which I think is the more important thing, and what especially being a parent and trying to work with my daughter on, is understanding why you value that. Because I think a lot of times we end up living a dream that's not really ours, or pursuing a dream that's no longer ours. It was like the 18-year-old ours because we wanted to have this sense of belonging for a community we're no longer a part of. And so really digging into that next level of not just what we want, but why we want it. Do I want it because I think it'll make my parents feel proud? Like, maybe that's a good thing, or maybe it's not. Maybe I actually don't value that as much as this other thing, in which case that shouldn't really be a value on my list. Like I should actually reassess where I'm putting my life, my time, my mind, because I'm valuing things differently now than I did when I was 17 or 27 or 37.
Yeah. How'd you decide to write it down and become an author? And what was the process of, get out of my head, bringing that to light?
Yeah. I mean, I love writing. So they're kind of the famous quote is, I don't like writing. I like having written. And I'm kind of the opposite. I actually really like the process of writing. And so it was a thing that I did when I was at McKinsey. I wrote a novel, and it was like trying to be Faulkner's As I Lay Dying meets William Styron's Lie Down in Darkness. And I was like, okay, this is good, like kind of Proustian multi-generational thing. And so I was all excited and shared it with some friends. And a guy that I really, really respect came back, and I think everybody was kind of waiting to give feedback, and he just called me. He's like, look, don't put any more time into this. Like you are one of the most well-read people. You know what good literature is. Like you can't fix this. Like this is not worthy of you and your time. Like, wow. Okay. So what did I do? I went and started another novel, right? Like it's like, okay, like that's helpful feedback. Good. Let me go to the next thing. Cause I like writing. I'm going to go start writing the next one. And so I was doing a lot of writing. I've written several children's books. I've written 3 screenplays for feature-length films. I started writing for a friend's blog and then ended up on Forbes and writing for them each month, and Huffington Post and others. So I was writing a bunch. And one day when I was swimming, I had this idea for a book. I was like, a book, a nonfiction book, because I had never written a nonfiction book. Nonfiction books, just like a whole bunch of articles that are thematic. Like if I'm writing this much for articles, why don't I go try to write a book? And so I did. And I ended up getting knee surgery October, November of 2019. So I was bedridden for a little bit. I was like, just started cranking on a book. And I got an agent, and the agent said, wow, you're a good writer. This is good. It has appeal. I think you could get a bigger audience. I think you have a bigger book in you. And so that book never got published, which is funny now, because now she comes back. She's like, that book would sell so well. Can you come back and do that book? I'm like, let me get a Lively going before I come back and do another book right now. Because I'd need to update a bunch on that book. But so we're trying to work on what is the big idea book? What is the big idea book? I'm going back and forth. And then COVID hits. And my company at the time was rented.com. And our constant push to owners, to our clients, was we help you maximize the value of your most valuable asset. And then in 2020 comes, and I see, myself included, but people scrolling, what's Johns Hopkins say the latest death count is on this? I see everybody freaking out. What the president tweet today? What did he tweet in the last 2 hours, right? Like everybody's living on social media. Their whole lives overtaken by things outside of themselves. And it hit me. I always say this physical home is your most valuable asset, but I'm looking around, and now Russian billionaires have shown us you don't ever own anything. Like your yacht can be just taken away. The government can go repossess, take anything from you. It can be broken, anything. Like any physical item you think you own, it's a delusion. Our physical health, a tiny virus that we can't see can come take that away from us in an instant. So that one thing that we actually can own is our mindset. And we don't need a trust fund. We don't need to work for a life to get it. We have it at birth. And yet we spend our lives giving it away to other people. The person who cut us off in traffic and we're in a bad mood for 2 hours, that person, we just gave our mind and our mood and our day to that person who literally doesn't know we exist. They cut us off because they probably didn't see us, right? They don't even know we're there. And yet we gave our mind to them. And so I was like, why in the world, with how miserable that is, do we do that? And it's universal. Right? Sam Altman, before we all knew about ChatGPT, tweeted back in 2019, don't let jerks live rent free in your head. Taylor Swift came out with an album, 2018, 2019, Lover, that had this line, free rent living in my mind. I'm like, okay, so the richest, the smartest, the most powerful, deal with this. Why? Like, what is going on there? I think there's a book there. And so I just went deep on the research. Like, what is the biology? What is the evolutionary biology? How did we end up with a brain that does that? And then how can you address it? Mm-hmm. And so the tools are how to address it. And it uses Stoicism and some quotes and principles from that as a framework to how do we stop renting from other people? How do we stop renting from events and circumstances outside our control and giving our mind away? And then the most difficult and kind of half the book is how do we do the same with different or imagined versions of ourselves, like the person we think our parents want us to be, the person we think we should have been when we were teenagers or whatever it is.
What is the why? Why do our brains do that to us?
I mean, I really think it gets back to the paranoia point. So the idea of pursuing happiness is a very new phenomenon, right? We weren't pursuing happiness. We were pursuing survival. Like what's going to keep you alive? And happiness wasn't keeping you alive in a very dangerous, risky environment, right? There weren't antibiotics. You got one little cut, you're dead, right? You get infected, you're done. And so the why is the brain that evolved to keep us alive creates situations where we create these negative narratives and all these things around it. And so that's part of it. Then you pointed out we are now have way more people in our lives than we did before. So when you were in small communities, 152, right? Dunbar number, you could manage relationships in a totally different way and your brain could process it. When you have 1,500 Facebook friends, much less like the barista, you don't know that person's way of thinking the same way. So you're reading their nonverbal cues, their tone, everything in different ways. And typically, again, in a more paranoid state, because defaulting to not being trusting, all of this is what kept you alive. It just doesn't, one, help, or two, make you happy. You know, Paul Newman in his memoir had this line of his choice to be trusting. He's like, did it cost me in business relationships? Did it have these negative? Yeah, there's no doubt. But would I still every single time trade off living a life of happiness and trust for whatever I would have got? It's like 100%. Like that was a choice I chose to make because that's the life I wanted to lead. And back to it's each of us, it's our own life to choose. I'm not saying this is the right answer, but I'm saying having looked at it, this is the answer I want to choose and what I want to work towards.
Sure. What on your value set is fed by the process of writing that elevates it up to, you know, you said 8 hours of sleep, hour time with my daughter, time at work, obviously health is important, and to devote those chunks to writing, which could be viewed as kind of a non-core ancillary task. Like, what is it about that? And then ultimately, like, what led you to want to put it out there?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, my number one value above all those things is growth, learning, progress. And that can be defined in different ways. And so, you know, I read 150, 200 books a year, and much less blogs and podcasts, everything, like just consuming. And it's an incredibly selfish endeavor to just consume all the time. And when Jim Lohr has this book, The Personal Credo, that you develop your own personal mission statement. And going through it, it got behind the why of the growth. And my personal mission statement, very, very almost verbatim the same as my co-founders, is to continuously learn and grow, to be able to take what I learn in service of benefiting others. And so distilling, and this is what pre-book, this is what a lot of the Forbes articles would be taking these ideas I'd find across 4, 5, 6 different books and distilling them down into here's this commonality that is useful and helpful to other people, and putting it in a much more digestible, easy to process way. And so with the book, the big reason was, you know, you think about fitness. Nobody believes you can go to the gym for a month or a year and be like, cool, I've done fitness for life.
Yeah,
like, I'm
nailed
set.
it.
Yeah. Or nutrition. Like, you know, I ate a lot of leafy greens today, so like I don't need to do that anymore. But for some reason with our mindset, people are like, oh, I went to this one Tony Robbins thing. Like I'm fixed. No, you're not. Like there's a reason monks meditate multiple times every single day. Like it's a daily practice, just like our fitness, just like our sleep, just like our nutrition. In a world where our biology is working against us in our brain to be successful, to be happy, to be all that, you have to work on it every single day. And so the idea you could read one book and be done, I didn't buy. And so I really wanted something that gave people tools they could go back to. So every chapter has, here's an exercise, here's a worksheet, here's a tool that you can have. And then it's a free PDF download. Like even if you don't want to read the book, here are the tools. These are useful. Then it was, I'm going to go create a custom GPT for free of like, look, even if you didn't want the PDF or the book, you can just go on to Chat GPT and get a free tool that you can query and work with and get through these exercises with whatever you're dealing with. And so, yeah, I mean, the why behind it was these were things that I learned and found helpful, and it seemed selfish not to share them with other people. And that's part of what drove me to moving out of vacation rentals in the first place was, I mean, just last week still, I get outreach from people like, I am a better person because I read your book. Mm-hmm. My life is better because I read your book. I'm like, you get 4 of those that was 100% worth the effort. You get hundreds of those. Like, yeah, there's no question that was a really good use of my time, given what my personal credo is, what my personal mission statement for my life is. That was a really good investment, I believe.
Yeah. How does your ego play into this? And I love Ryan Holiday. I read The Daily Dad, highly recommend it. I've read Ego is the Enemy a couple times at this point, and it's probably a limiting belief, but sometimes I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I should share things externally. I have a lot to do on my own before I get out there and share anything else. But I'm curious, how do you notice your ego at play or not at play in the process of writing, sharing, audience building, all of that?
Yeah, this is where I'm really big on living and sharing in the open, right? Building in the open, sharing. So you see the ups and the down, like, probably nothing more difficult than going through divorce. That's where we start. Like, look, it's not this polished thing of you can go look at a CV and see all these tick boxes. Like, no, there's some real pain on all these other people. I did a TED Talk a week and a half ago. Like, hey, here was what the cost is, and here's how it led to my divorce. And like, this is the other side. And so I don't know. I mean, there still could be ego tied to that, but in today's world where distribution is almost free, if I'm thinking through these things and I'm going to journal and write them down anyway, like, that's why I have a blog of, hey, if anybody, even if nobody reads it, I'm going to put it out there anyway, because I'm thinking I'm writing it. And if, by the way, it being out, somebody finds benefit from it, then it would be selfish of me not to share it. And basically universally, somebody comes back and like, wow, that I needed that today. Like, that really helped. And so, it's back to, if you have a question, back when you're in school, if you have a question, don't feel dumb. Someone else probably has the same question. Ask the question. And it's the same thing. If you're struggling with this thing, I'm not writing. I don't think, if you look at any of it, and this is a funny thing, my ex-wife would talk about a lot, like, how can you be the one writing this? And I'm pretty sure Ryan Holiday's wife has a similar take of like, you're not perfect on any of this. I'm like, exactly. That's why we're the perfect people to write about it, because we're not coming at it from this theoretical. Like, we're struggling with it because we're human beings. And the reason we have to write, like, so much of what I have to write and do is because it's a thing I'm having to work through. Yeah. That's what enabled me to write it and put my perspective in it, is like, this is a thing I struggle with. That's why I know it's real. And I know it's real for me. I don't know if it's real for you, but I know it's real for me, and I'm going to share that. And if you see yourself in that and this can be helpful, it would be selfish of me not to share that. Yeah. I'm not trying to pitch as like, look, I'm the Buddha, right? I'm not. I haven't fixed any of this stuff. People on the mindset stuff, like, okay, great. Like, I get all that. So how do you fix it? It's like, as far as I can tell, unless you're Buddha, you don't. You just get better at noticing it, what your triggers are, what your responses are, and then what tool you want to use to end up with the answer, the process, the response that you actually want versus what you might default to.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And then going back to, again, values, time in the day, another belief that I would have that might be a limiting belief is like, to be an entrepreneur and a serial entrepreneur, like, requires an uncommon like tax on what you're going to do, like hours use and horsepower and otherwise. And when you were describing taking a full day and then limiting it by what's top of values, what I've experienced in times when I'm really trying to be healthy and well and a present parent and partner is, oh man, there's not enough hours for me to really bring horsepower at work. How have you approached and navigated that at your different startup journeys, and then being now, at the beginning of something that is focused on health and wellness and Healthspan? Like, how do you approach making sure that you're giving enough creative horsepower and time attention, but not being extractive on your health and on your wellness?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is, as an athlete, and I think this is true in most college athletes, most athletes have better grades in season than out of season. When you are compressed on time, you're forced to not procrastinate and you're forced to focus on the most important things, right? Like back to Greg McConnell's essentialism. Like what is actually essential? There are a million things you could do. And this is each day when I check in with my co-founder, we go through, we have a tag, we use ClickUp instead of Notion, but we have a tab that's all work to be done. Like there are infinite things that we can do. And we have a below the line and we're like, what are the things that actually matter that we need to be doing right now? And that's typically no more than 3 things. And they're 50 below the line. Like that's a really good idea. Let's go look at, is that a thing we need to do now that matters right now versus a thing we don't want to lose and we might come back to, but it's not when we have this size team working on it, it's not going to be above the line. And so being really, really clear on what needs to happen and will move the needle, 1, and then 2, what needs me to be doing that. And that was a big wake up call for me. Friend PJ Bain, CEO of Prime Revenue here in town. He was asking how business was going at one point, and I was like kind of whining. He's like, look, remember, it's your company. If you don't like what you're doing, change what you're doing. I'm like, oh. And so I just hired people who were better than me to do the things I didn't want to do. Wow. And then that gave me the room to do way more writing, which I love to do, and share those things. And by the way, that helped us recruit way more people, because by building in the open and sharing all of that, any position before we'd post, we'd have so much inbound because people knew what I valued, knew how I approach things, and they would opt in. And the people who didn't wouldn't opt in because it was all out in the open. They knew exactly what they were getting coming in. And that's one of the benefits of sharing everything and being in the open is you don't do it to be likable to everybody or to appeal to everyone. You do it to share, like, here's who I am. Like, I'm not trying to put on a facade or some kind of display of a role, but rather here's who I am. And if you resonate with that, like, you're probably going to really enjoy working together, being friends, whatever it is, because this is who I am. And it's funny, I think in a world of social media where there is so much creating this story, this facade, like I'll meet people like, you're really the person that you portray. I'm like, yeah, but like, why would I put work into not being, that seems like a lot of effort. Like, It's so hard to figure out and be who I want to be and just live that authentically. Like, why would I do that? And then on top of that, have to go create another character. That seems
sounds
like
exhausting.
Yeah. And that's why, I think being an influencer is really, really tough job. I think people have this perception of it, but you go read some of the books, like Extremely Online and these others, like that is not a job I would ever want to sign up for. That is a tough job.
How do you think about your use of time for content creation and putting it out there? Like, how big of a box in your day or week, like, does it take up?
I would say less than an hour total. Well, I guess depends what you count as content. So blog posts or writing, you count as well?
It's content creation and dissemination, I would say.
It really depends on the week on how much goes in, because there'll be some days I'll write 4 blog posts just back to back. Like I'm just in the zone. I have the time. I'm like, okay, I have this block of time. I'm just going to be writing today. I'm cranking on that. And then I might go a few weeks without doing it. But I'm always like a month or 2 ahead on a weekly blog post. And this is the thing I struggle with and trying to figure out how to navigate of social media becomes all consuming. And I find that there's one thing in sharing in the blog and there's another in the distribution and putting it out there. And I'll find numerous times I'm in something that I'm enjoying, that's an amazing thing. And instead of being in it and enjoying it, I'm crafting, how am I going to now share this on social media? I'm like, man, like I really don't like where my headspace is going now.
Same.
And so that is one I don't have an answer to right now, but it is something in the past 3 months maybe that I've noticed, and I don't like the path that's on. So it's something I'm trying to work on now.
Yeah. I just did a interview with Kyle and Brent Peace from the Kyle Peace Foundation. Awesome podcast. And then it had been in the works, but then they, impelled me to come and run with them. And so I went, and my brother and I ran alongside Angel, who was a hand cycle athlete. And the whole time I'm like, if I really wanted to be in service of Macon Atlanta and this content that I'm putting a lot of myself into, I would film most of today because it would be a pretty compelling reel and short. And I was like, but I want to like be here and do the thing. And like, it's not so that I can like get a snackable picture and create it. And that is a tricky balance, man. It's really tough.
It is. And it may be like, I push back against the idea of balance because that always to me equates equality versus tension. An equilibrium of, and it's a dynamic equilibrium of what is the right in this situation or this phase of life or this season proportion, work versus play or family versus friends, all these things. It's not, to me, it's not a balance. It's like, what is the right equation? What is the point that's the equilibrium and how do I dial that in? The flip side on this, because people always say, oh, you're living behind a camera and all this versus being there in the moment. As a parent, I go back to the videos and pictures of my daughter when she was younger. Like I was very, very present, but I also love the videos. I mean, there's certain ones I go back to all the time and share with her. And like, I don't know, I love it. And you say, oh, you'll have the memory in your head. Maybe, but you forget way more than you remember. And I think there is value just selfishly and personally to be able to go back to that. Like, oh my God. And that's a beautiful thing. I think Apple and Google all do of 7 years ago today, like, oh my God. And it really takes you back. And to the sharing and building it, there's a value on that side too. And so it is, what is the equilibrium there? Like, hey, maybe in general, I'm going to do it, but today I just want to be here. This is a choice I'm just going to make. I'm going to trade it off. And I think it's a personal answer and it's a dynamic answer.
Yeah. I also appreciate how, regardless of what you choose, you made it a conscious choice by noticing. It's not just your automatic default around content, phone out. That's something I'm working towards too, of trying to at least understand when I'm using the technology and why, and not it be automatic because I'm standing up to walk into another room or the bathroom. So of course I'm on my phone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's also, for me, very deliberately, like we talked before we started recording this, because you were talking about looking at time. I was like, look, man, I'm like you. I don't have a device with a screen that I wear because I don't want more interruption in my day. And so it was a really funny thing now that Whoop added step count, because when I had my phone and that was my only step count, because Apple Health will show you, it was like 3,500 a day. I'm like, man, I guess like I swim a lot and maybe I'm just not that mobile. It's really surprising. Like I go to the gym, I do all this. Now they have the Whoop, I'm like 15,000 a day. I'm like, oh, I just really don't let my phone dictate my, like I keep it away because I can't focus if that's around me and near me. So I live my life away from a screen a lot of the time. So it's Ulysses tying his hands to the mast, right? Like, hey, if I can't do it, I'm not going to do it because I might not be strong enough. It was there probably to override.
Let's drop in on a lively.
Yeah.
So one, just having known you for a long time and then watching your journey, I see a beautiful integration of personal values and now becoming, your vocation as well. How did Healthspan become a focus for you and ultimately become a place where you wanted to go after from a career side?
Yeah. So, I mean, it goes back when I sold Rented in 2022, it was the same year I published Get Out of My Head. And Rented was my third company in the vacation rental space. Like I had gotten to a point in that industry where that year, if you asked ChatGPT, what are the top names in vacation rentals? It was like Brian Chesky of Airbnb, Chip Conley of Airbnb, and I think I was number 3, right? Like I really invested everything into that industry. And I go write this book, which was just like a fun thing to go do on the side, and start getting all these messages forwarded from other people of, oh, my friend read your book. Here's what they said, all this. Like, man, I think I could do more with my life than help people make more money from their vacation homes. Like I think I could help more than this. And so I knew I wanted to get out of that industry and get into something that was going to more directly benefit people's lives. And so at the time, because the book was on mindset, it was, I want to do something around mindset. And it was in my mind, kind of this gamification I wanted to do, like World of Warcraft, meets you're building something, but you're doing it through these mental health exercises. So like use the Duolingo addictivity and streaks and all that to get you in doing this app that would get you to do mental health exercises kind of on a daily basis. Back to, hey, it's not a one and done thing. It's like nutrition. It's like fitness. You need to continue and build on it. And so was looking at what that would take. Because I was like, no matter what area of life you care about, right? I was looking, do I go to climate tech? Do I go to ed tech and all this? I'm like, you know what? I don't have deep expertise there, but if I could help people with their mindset and make them more effective, the person who's amazing at climate tech and space tech and ed tech, they're going to be that much more effective and the world will get better products as a result if I can nail this. So it's this idea of mindset's foundational. And then my now co-founder, who I'd known for 10 years in the travel industry, he had launched Booking.com in North America, scaled it from $100 million startup to $140 billion public company, ran all their partnership stuff. He reached out and he said, look, I see this transition you're making from this vacation rental expert and kind of thought leader guy to this mindset thing. Like I see what you're posting and what you're talking about and just talks you're giving. Can I talk to you about some career advice? And he had been going through the certification process as a mindset coach and all this. And so he was looking to get out of travel, which he had spent his entire career in, longer than I had, more than twice as long as I had, to get more into this mindset stuff. I said, you know what? I'm actually looking to do something similar. Maybe we could do this together. Like we know each other, we believe in each other. We could be a good partnership. So he was in New York. He hopped on a plane, flew to Bermuda, and we started working on it together and kind of ideating. And we said, okay, yeah, mindset's foundational. And then we started understanding what are people actually after? And it's not just living longer. Actually, a lot of people aren't super excited about living longer. They want to live better while they're here. And that's what this idea of Healthspan is adding the healthy years to your life, not just life to your, or not just years to your life, but life to your years. And so we said, okay, well, mindset is one of the pillars and foundations, but so's sleep, so's fitness, so's nutrition, so's social connection, like realizing how big social connection and purpose were. And so we're like, okay, do we want to go be another product, right? There's so many products and services out there and billions pouring in, launching new ones every single year. So do we really want to go in that? And it's plus Chat GPT came out with custom GPTs. So I could kind of just give for free very quickly a lot of what I wanted to go spend a bunch of money building. I'm like, well, if I can just give it for free, like here you go. People can use that. And I don't have to go try to stand out in the app store, this, that, and the other. I can just put it out there. And if anybody wants it, they can access it. So we said, okay, what can we do unique in this space? And my first business, Vacation Futures, was a marketplace. He scaled the second most successful marketplace, behind Amazon of that era, the .com. And we said, you know what's crazy? There's not a place that brings all these pillars together in health. There's not a marketplace for health. There's the feed for endurance athletes, nutrition. There are supplement verticals of the supplement marketplace or individual things, but there's nothing that brings whole health together to help you navigate across and learn across and track across. We know how to build marketplaces. Like maybe let's go try to do that. And then as we started doing it, we realized there's so many things you can now do differently, right? So we live in a world where our bed, if you have an 8 sleep or a chili pad or whatever, it knows what temperature to be at when in the night. Like it can tell if we're restless and adjust the temperature accordingly. Our thermostat knows if we're home or not, and it adjusts the temperature for us. Our playlist on Spotify, like, oh, you're listening to this now, I know to play this next, and like, here's what goes together. And yet these gargantuan companies give you a blank search box. Like, hey, go figure out what you want. And then you go search and you get 3,500 results for the thing you search for. You're like, well, what's the right one? Like, how do I know? And maybe that's fine if you're getting a pair of tennis shoes or a t-shirt or something. But if it's something you're going to put into your body, it's something that's around your health. It's like most core to you. Maybe you don't need 3,500 results. You need the right thing for you at the right time. And I said, okay, if our bed and thermostat, all this can know, and with wearables, we're tracking real-time data, so much stuff. Why couldn't we be way more helpful and directive of, you know what I've seen the last 45 days? your wake events went from 2 times a night to 8 times a night. Like, is it a noise thing? Because these earplugs are only $6. Maybe that would help. Like, what is come with suggestions based on the data? Like, all these people are tracking this data. As far as I can tell, no company is giving you real help on what then to do with it. They give you generic feedback. Like my co-founder's avid runner, go run 10, 15 miles in the morning at sunrise. And if he has a bad night's sleep, the Lord's like, okay, you should really get out and get some morning sunlight and probably get your steps up. And he's like, you should know I've already gotten 23,000 steps today and it's 8 a.m. and I've been outside since 5:30 a.m. So I got all the morning sunlight. Like, that's not helpful input for me. And so we're really trying to take it to that next level to help people live healthier longer. Because just a lot of people are trying to do it. And I think they're just not trying to do it the right way. Right? Like health coaches or whatever it is.
So is the product integrating with your data to make suggestions, or it's a marketplace where you can buy things, or both?
It's both. So we said, okay, people have a hard time starting new habits and sticking with them. And so you're asking people to be something they're not, which is where I think Noom and a lot of these others have a hard time. They may acquire a customer, but LTV is very hard. Like, they churn out because people have a really hard time sticking with it. We said, okay, that's hard for people. What are people really good at? What have they proven time after time they're really good at? Oh, clicking buttons on their phone to buy things. Like, they're really good at that. What if we meet them there? And instead of just trying to sell them another cheap knockoff thing that's just trash in 2 months, the things that we're suggesting to them and surfacing are things that we can show data are helping them live better. Like, oh, you're having a tough time sleeping. We see 74% of people who bought this product within 2 weeks started seeing 22 minutes more deep in REM sleep at night. Do you want to add this to your subscription? And so it's both. It takes both to do something different. Otherwise, you're just like another website to buy crap.
Yeah, makes sense. Why do you think this is going to work? And then what's your story, to use our story word from earlier, on why it would fail?
Yeah, I mean, I think why it would work is we're tiny. We launched a month and a half ago. We get inbounds from brands saying, oh my God, we've been waiting for a health and wellness marketplace. Like, it's baffled us that this hasn't existed. So we just get inbounds from brands. We get inbounds from influencers wanting to create their custom pages. Instead of a link tree out with 17 different affiliate links that you don't know how to track conversion or anything, they can get these custom storefronts on, here's my stack, here's why I use all this. They can build on that. So we get a bunch of inbound from them. And then you talk to consumers like, oh my God, I'm your customer. Like, here's why. And 9 times out of 10, probably more than 9 times out of 10, 95 times out of 100. Like, every now and then somebody's like, yeah, that's not really me. But 95% of the time people are like, oh my God, I'm your ideal customer. Like, I have this, but I don't really know what to do with it. I'm not doing anything with the data, or I track it in a spreadsheet. Like, whatever the answer is, you're like, I'm your customer. Like, okay, cool. Like, that's a good sign. If it doesn't work, it's, I think, poor execution. I mean, this is, again, being a deluded entrepreneur. Like, it was one of those things that I could hear the 8, 10, whatever steps that go from awareness through repeat purchase and going. And within 6 weeks of launch, like, we're seeing the whole flow work. That like, it works. It's no longer theory. And so it's just optimization. And so if it doesn't work, in my mind, it's my failure to execute a good optimization plan to really, at every juncture, deliver value, more value than I'm extracting. As long as you're delivering more value than you're extracting from the stakeholders, you have a winning product. Sure.
And the game you all are playing is for people to sign up for recurring subscriptions for products and then buy one-off for things that are bigger ticket items, like an 8 sleep. Am I thinking about that?
Yeah, or a mix. I mean, you could be a one-off for a smaller. It could be a rad roller. It's a $15 item or something. Like, it doesn't always have to be a subscription. A lot of this stuff is, but that's more the consumables and the nutrition pillar. A lot of the stuff, like, you're going to go buy kettlebells. You're probably not going to buy another kettlebell set forever. But back to why we're working across the 5 pillars of Healthspan, what we keep seeing is people over-optimize in 1 or 2, and they're totally blind to the importance of the other pillars. And so with data science on the other side, seeing, okay, look, you actually don't need all this time in the gym. You might be better off subtracting 2 hours a week, whether that's 20 minutes a day, or it's like these 2 days, you take an hour out to get more recovery, because here's what you're HRV is like totally depressed. And so you need to be focused more on this. Or I see you're doing all this. Are you doing it with other people? Because I don't see you moving enough to get that social connection side. And like you're nailing these 4, but did you know, even with those 4 held constant, socially isolated older adults have a 50% greater risk of developing early onset dementia. Like, do you want to take something from one of these buckets to put into that? Like, we can't monetize it, but if we're going to help you live healthier longer, this needs to be served up. And I think that's a big part of buying the credibility as well, of somebody coming in trying to buy a molecule. Like, why do you want it? Oh, to sleep better. Like, okay, well, we actually see from the data you have in here that when you get 12,000 steps, you sleep 25% better than when you don't. But you only average 9,500 steps today. Before you buy a molecule, before you pay us money, would you like to try to just change that first and then see, do you really need to pay for something on top? Because maybe that money is better spent not on the sleep pillar, but on a gym membership. Like maybe once you get the 12,000 steps, you don't need the gym membership, right?
Sure.
Like all these things. And so really not always having it be to push another product, but to really help you on your lifelong journey to Healthspan.
Yeah. What's your fear that Whoop or one of the companies builds that? And I'll give a personal example. So I just ran New York Marathon in November. And in the last few weeks up to the marathon, I used Claude, Anthropic's AI product, as a running coach. And I told it was a elite running coach with a big personality. And that's the role it was playing. And then I had it coach me through all elements of the race week and the actual course. And the great thing about the New York Marathon, there's so much written on it that my coach with this big personality could tell me turn by turn what to expect. We talked about what to eat the day of, race week prep, time goals, splits. Like I spent a lot of time. Yeah. I had a long flight and I just really nerded out with this AI coach. And it got to the point where I finished the race and I was walking to a meal with my family, and one of the things I was most excited to do was tell my AI coach how the race went. And I was like, whoa, that's nuts. Like, so speaking of noticing, I noticed that I had formed an affinity for this AI coach. Yeah. And then my second thought was like, man, what a missed opportunity for Whoop. Whoop knows every single workout I've done in the last 16 weeks and should be my running coach, but yet it's Claude that doesn't know anything that I don't tell it about that. Yeah. So do you worry that, the integration of your data into actionable insights will be done by one of these companies in a way that there isn't a need for you, or are they just not doing it so it creates a marketplace gap?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are at least 2 things going on there. One, the market share of any one, whether it's Garmin, Apple Watch, a Samsung product or Google product, a Whoop or an Aura or a Superhuman. Like there's so many that the idea that one will own and have that, like maybe they add it into their product and so it's just less valuable is possible. Like, we're partners with Whoop. One of our advisors runs growth for Whoop, is on their board. So I think the other piece is it's so hard to do what you need to do in your core business really well in a super competitive environment that's a different thing. Like to give you the recommendations, one thing, to then have to go build an entire marketplace and build brand relationships across, like that's a really big undertaking in business that, I mean, you've worked at company, like it's very hard to execute on your core and to just go build another business on the side. It may happen, but do I think us being 100% focused and totally device agnostic have a better chance of just being laser focused and moving super quickly and not having any vested interest on a different part of the business that we have to consider? Could we move faster and better if somebody decided to do it? I think so. But like back to why we might fail, I mean, that is a possibility that could happen.
Yeah. Is there a non-consumer buys a product monetization that you all have? Like, is there a subscription service to any of that?
Right now, no.
Okay.
There's all sorts of things you could do down the line with things, but right now it's this pure e-com play.
Got it. And when you think about Healthspan, what do you want? Like, what should normal people be thinking about with Healthspan? Like, what do you want someone listening to this to take away? You mentioned the 5 determinants of health, excuse me, and otherwise, like, what do you want someone to know?
Yeah. What I would want someone to know is you actually don't need to go spend money. I would say for 90% of people listening to this, don't major in the minors, which is what you constantly hear from Hero and others. Like, yes, you could get a red light. You could go get your rapamycin prescription. Like, there are all these things you could do. But before you worry about any of the fringe things, get the baseline right. So let's start with fitness. Moving your body vigorously for 10 minutes a day is associated with a 50% reduction in all-cause mortality. And if you say, I don't have 10 minutes, okay, 4.5 minutes is associated with a 28% reduction in all-cause mortality. You don't need 90 minutes in the gym. This was a big wake-up call for me after I finished swimming in college. And in college, when we swam, I had morning practice 5 days a week, afternoon practice 5 days a week. And then a lot of times we'd have to personally go in on Sunday just to do extra yardage. And we'd lift and we have all this training. The practice was 2 to 3 hours. And I competed at a certain level, right? D1 All-American. Take 2 years off, go to law school. My third year of law school, I end up in the UK doing a joint degree. They don't have eligibility rules, so I can go swim for the team there. We would have 3 to 4 practices a week. They would be 45 minutes. We didn't have a coach. We would just kind of coach each other. I went in the 200 meters within 2 seconds of the time that made me a D1 All-American in college. 98% of the effort was for 2% value. The first step is the most valuable. You get the most lift from the first step. So if you're there and like, well, I can't get to the gym for 90 minutes or 60 minutes or half an hour, fine. Like, get up, do some air squats, do some push-ups, do some jumping jacks. Like, just move your body. Do it a few times a day. When I'm on an airplane, every hour I get up, go to the bathroom and do 20 squats in the bathroom. Like, just moving the body. Is it as good as going to the gym? No. But is it better than just sitting on the plane the whole time? A lot better.
Yeah.
So just take that first step on fitness. Nutrition. Are you carnivore? Are you vegan? Are you paleo? Whatever. Like, I don't really have a dog in that fight. I don't know. But I do know if you get at least a gram of protein for each pound, some say just per kilo, but in that range of protein in your diet, and 700 grams of plants, then you're going to be satiated, you're going to be full, and whatever you eat on the fringe, you're like, but I really like Oreos. Cool. Like, go have some Oreos. You're not going to want that many once you've filled with that much protein and that much fresh plants. You do that, like, that's the baseline, and you have a lot of friends. Like, you could optimize. Oh, I want a 6-pack. Okay, then you can go optimize. But if you just want baseline health, 700 grams of plants, gram of protein per pound or kilo, up to you. Sleep. Yeah, you get an 8 sleep or chili pad and have your red light therapy and noise machine. Like, you could do all those things. But the baseline, like, can you block 8 hours of sleep? 8 hours in bed, because you can't guarantee if you're going to sleep. Like, don't put the stress on, I need to sleep. Just like this amount of time in bed. And probably even more important, the consistent, go to bed at this time, wake up at this time. That for me was the biggest wake up when I used to do social jet lag, where Monday to Friday would be one schedule, Saturday, Sunday would be a totally different. And the effects you're putting on your body and your mind doing that every single week, it's like doing cross-country flights. It's terrible. I had no idea. So consistent bed and wake time, probably the most impactful thing I think you could do for sleep. Mindset. Well, I can't meditate for 30 minutes every day. Okay, cool. Did you know that this 5-minute physiological side has shown to reduce stress better than meditation? 5 minutes. You can do it while you're driving in the car. You can do it anywhere. Like, just for 5 minutes. Like, can you take 5 minutes at some point in your day? You can double task while you're cooking breakfast, while you're cooking dinner. Like, just do that. Baseline, just a little bit to come back into your breath and your body and your mind to be present. And then social connection. This one's a little harder because it's dependent on other people. But whether it's 6 hours of face-to-face time a week, which is not a ton to ask, a week with close friends or family members, or 5 to 10 meaningful touches a day, hugs, handshakes, even just a pat on the back, have been shown to boost oxytocin, decrease stress, increase mental health, give stronger immune responses. Your body physically reacts better if you're getting that regular physical touch. And so just get out, engage with people. Like, I used to live with my headphones in my ears, right? All the podcasts, all the books. And once I started realizing how important social connection was, I don't wear headphones in the gym anymore. I now organize group workouts with friends. When I sit on the plane, I used to like headphones, like make sure they don't talk to me. They might try to talk the whole flight. I'm the one that's like annoying the person next to me every single flight. I did it just the flight to Atlanta this past time. Talked to the guy. He's a Brit, but grew up in Kiowa. He like had this whole catering business that he catered for DeSantis, but also for the Clintons and all that. Like the stories I got to learn. He just bought he has the license now to import the cider for the best cidery in the world. At the competition, they won gold, silver, and bronze for the 3 different ones that they have. And he has a US, like it was just a fascinating conversation. And I could have just sat there and read my book or listened to a podcast or watched TV, but I would have never gotten to know this guy. And he has a place down in Riviera Maya. It's where I want to go for New Year's. Like, oh mate, I'll send you an itinerary. You need to go to San Miguel Allende. And like did the same. When I went to Greece, started talking to the guy next to me. He was from Idra, where I was going. Now Idra is a tiny island, probably like a couple hundred people. They don't have cars. They don't have scooters. You get around by a donkey. This guy grew up there. He showed me a picture. He's like, oh, my brother, you have to go see my brother. He has the restaurant rated 2nd best view in the world. Shows me a picture of his brother with Jeff Bezos and Bezos' yacht and all this. So I go meet his brother. They give me all these presents. His niece invites me to her wedding there next summer. Like if I just put on my headphones and not engage, I'd miss out on all that. Social connection. I don't think you have to revamp your entire social life. Just start talking to people. Everybody's interesting in their own way. Just start talking to them.
Yeah. I mean, all of that tracks and none of that is buying anything related to Healthspan. So like, how do you square those with the product you're building? Where when you just said it's like a lot of the lift is free and available if you prioritize it and want to.
Yeah. I mean, and that's why if you go to our website, the first thing we do is like, before you buy anything, here's the free guide. Here's the baseline free thing. Please, before you buy anything, do this. Oh, and by the way, if you do want to buy something, here's a 10% off code.
Yeah.
Right. So meet people where they are. Here's the thing I'm going to give you for free because it is free. And my ultimate objective is to help you live healthier longer. I also know people find it easier to click buttons to buy things than to go act on other things. So would the ideal state, everybody do that? Yes, that would be ideal. But we live in the real world. So I'm going to give it to you. But if you find it easier, like, yeah, I get that, but I have a hard time going to sleep at the same time every night. And so I want some melatonin or magnesium, or whatever. Like, great. Okay. Let me help you find the right one for you and which one's the most effective because I can see across the data. I'm going to help serve that up for you. So I don't see them in conflict. And then just ethically, the fact that we lead with here's all the free stuff. Like before you start buying from us, here's the free stuff. I feel good about personally.
Yeah, totally. What keeps you up at night, whether it's about your own health span or building the business or...
Yeah. So this has been a consistent question, for 10, 15 years. And I mean, for 10 years, the answer is like, I don't know. I sleep really well. There's a reason I work on my mindset and like, I do my meditation, I do my red light. I do all this stuff of, I've had relationships where like, oh, I sleep great. Blah, blah, blah. And then they're after the next day, like, you fall asleep instantly. Like you.
All right. Metaphorically, what are you potentially worried about otherwise?
But I think this gets back to the stress because this gets back to the core Stoic principle of what is in my control and what's not. And so again, outcomes are not in my control. My mindset and my process is. So I don't stress about it. I put it down on paper. If I start stressing about something, I'm like, okay, instead of being stressed, let me write down very specifically what I'm concerned about. Oh, it's not the whole universe. It's these 3 things. Oh, number 2 and 3, I can't influence in any way.
Yeah.
That's off the list. I'm not going to put more mind share. I've just written it down and now I get it. Cool. It's gone. Number 1. Oh, there's some things I can do there. I'm going to go do some work around that. And so I just really don't stress a lot about stuff.
It's awesome. That feels like enough of an endorsement for why to read the book and why to think about building the mindset too.
Whether you read the book or just go to my website and download the free PDF, right? Sure. Like, because it's the book, the exercises and the consistency of doing the work is what helps that, not reading the book once. And so, yes, it will take money out of my pocket to say, hey, just go get the free PDF. But I would rather you do the work than buy the book and then not do the work.
Yeah.
I would say to inspire people to do the work, that's really the purpose of the book. So I go back to Tim Ferriss. He had the 4-Hour Body. And, it's like 30 different 20 to 30 page chapters on everything from back pain to diet to putting on muscle. And there's this one on how to cut 30 pounds of fat in 30 days without doing any exercise. And it's a slow carb diet. And shared it with my dad. He lost 65 pounds. He was a cardiologist, right? Like, as a physician, lost 65 pounds in a year, started running half marathons. Shared it with my former brother-in-law. He lost a ton of weight, got in the best shape of his life. Shared it with father-in-law and all this. And what was interesting to me was every single one, the trigger that got them to actually act on it wasn't the act of reading the book. It was specific aha moments. So I think what Tim Ferriss does a really good job of, and this is why I did my book the way it was giving different stories of people using these things so that you could find what resonated with you. One from history, one from modern times, one from the Stoics and the quotes and all that. And so my dad, there was one of this NASA scientist who's going to try on clothes. He's like, why does it even matter? Like, I'm going to look terrible in whatever I wear. And then the guy's like, wait a minute. I'm a NASA scientist. Like, I'm one of the best in my field. Anything that I've ever tried to do and cared about, I've done excellently. Why can't I do this excellently? And so he did. And my dad is like very proud of himself. He's like, wait, I'm great at everything I do. I can go do this, right? That was his aha. My brother-in-law, he was learning about the visceral fat versus subcutaneous fat, right? It was like, oh, wait, I could have around my organs. I might not look fat, but what I'm doing could be damaging my organs. I just had this child. I want to be around for my children. This, that. So that was his aha. My father-in-law, he never read the book. But his aha wasn't until we went hiking and he was like winded 10 minutes in and couldn't keep up. And he's like, oh, when I get home, I really need to change this. And it was this realization that you need your own aha. And so that would be one reason to get the book, is find what ahas trigger, like, oh, I really do struggle with that. And that way of implementing the thing is a way that, and this is why, we have the podcast, the Home Healthspan podcast that we do, is the exact same thing. Right? I could have a 63-year-old fitness influencer or psychiatrist or 23-year-old carnivore D1 athlete, right? It's not saying this is one objective truth. It's saying here are different models. Which one resonates with you and seems more likely to have the goals you have and be where you are in life that you want to be inspired by and emulate? Yeah,
that makes a ton of sense. I've got my mom on the slow carb diet who will probably listen to this. Hi, Mom. Her limiting belief was that she could never not eat fruit. It's like, just loves fruit. And then she's been doing it for a few months and she's like, I really don't miss the fruit. Have it on cheat day.
That's the thing. Once you have the cheat day, it just takes it away. You're like, well, I'm never going to have a cupcake again. Like, no, it's just going to be a few days. I'm going to have a cupcake. It's cool.
Yeah, maybe 8.
Yeah.
Let's go to our lightning round.
Okay.
Which Andrew told me one of them might not be a lightning answer, which I appreciate. Favorite Atlanta meal?
I mean, maybe this is too bougie, but I do think Lazy Betty is the best restaurant in the city. And I've never had anything but the best meals there.
Yeah. It is bougie and it's the right answer. Yeah, it's incredible. We're saving it for a next special occasion, but I'm right with you there.
Yeah.
What do you think happens to you or to us when we die?
Yeah. So this is one that could get a little longer. So if you go back right now, in you, in me, are particles that were part of Shakespeare and Genghis Khan and Napoleon and Winston Churchill and Hitler, right? Like, in us at any given moment are particles from all those. Because from the birth of the universe to its ultimate death, every single particle was there and will be there.
Sure.
And it's constantly changing. So I am a firm believer that this idea of this separation of me and you, or this table, and it's false, because we're shedding cells and regenerating cells constantly. Like, these atoms are moving back and forth infinitely.
Yeah, it's a wild thing about parenthood that every single part of my daughter has been here forever, but she's never been here.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just like this manifested, and it's it's not Perseus, the ship of
Theseus.
The ship is where you replace every part of the ship. And it's like, is it still the same ship? And that's true of even our brain, right? Over 8 months or something, every single particle in our brain turns over. So you're like, oh, well, yeah, maybe that's true for skin cells, but what about our brain? No, our brain's 100% turning over as well. The cells are actually turning over. So this idea of before we die or after we die, I'd say we're infinite. This is a current manifestation of a set of particles that are flowing. But what's the founder, Naval Ravikant? He's like, what do you think about death? And he's like, well, remember what it was like before you were born? I think it's a lot like that. And it's, our particles will still be there infinitely, just like they were infinitely before. And what happens is we continue to be part of the eternal, just like we are right now, and just like we were before we were in this form.
And then our consciousness turns off.
The consciousness part, that is one I don't know yet. I don't like, I mean, I don't know any of this, to be clear, right? This is my what I think, but that's one, I have a lot of ill-informed opinions, and that's one I don't even think I have an opinion on, because I'm so ill-informed on what is consciousness. Like, I don't know. I haven't read great research on, like, here's what happens. I think there are a lot of people, because of fear of death and the idea of, like, how could there be a universe without me? Like something must happen to our consciousness. But I don't think we really know what consciousness is to be able to define this before and after, personally.
We'll sync up on that in like 20 years.
Yeah, maybe we'll learn a lot more. Yeah.
Read some more stuff.
Yeah.
What's a favorite book that you would recommend to folks listening?
I mean, it really depends where you are in your own personal journey. If I could do a few, I would say a couple of years ago, my most gifted book was From Strength to Strength by Arthur C. Brooks. And this idea of this life in quarters. And we end up unfulfilled, unhappy, because we're trying to play for a different quarter when we have different skill sets, we have different mental abilities. And I was hitting an age where a lot of my friends were struggling with similar things. And so I would be in line at a bookstore and hear people talking about something, like, oh, here, I'm buying this for you, and just give it to them. Because like this is a really helpful framing for that. For someone not necessarily understanding how important social connection is, the Connection Cure by Julia Hatz just came out this year, I think is a fantastic one. And then I'm having him on the Home Healthspan later this week, Dr. Greger. He has a number of books, but the one that changed my life and how I go about it is How Not to Die. And he runs nutritionfacts.org and just well-versed in nutrition, what we should be getting into our diet, what we shouldn't. And so depending on what you're looking for, those would be three that I've found really important in my life.
It's awesome. Thank you. What's a habit that you see us embracing in modern culture that you think doesn't serve us well? And what should we replace that habit with, rather?
Yeah, and I love the replacement. So on another flight, when I was going down to Florida the other week, of course, talking to the guy, because I talked to everybody I was sitting next to. And he's like, oh, why are you going down? I said, oh, I'm going to this health conference. Like, oh, that's not me. I just kind of sit on the couch. I'm not a healthy guy. But I'm 49. When I'm 50, I told myself I'm going to start exercising and stop smoking. I was like, well, perfect. Like, that'll be really good, because you can replace one with the other. So every time you're at work and you want a cigarette break, just go take a walk instead. He's like, oh my God, like, that's a great idea. I could just go walk around the park by my office instead of smoking. I'm like, yeah, because if you were just sitting there and just fighting it, it's way harder than if you replace. So what is something that we do in fighting boredom, right? The first reaction, and it's not, I'm as guilty of this as every other human being. First reaction of, if there's a dead time, if someone gets up, we're having lunch or coffee with someone and they go to the bathroom, they go to pick up the phone. I can't sit quietly in a room by myself. I need the external engagement. I think that is a dangerous habit. It takes away our creativity. It takes away a lot of our critical thinking. It takes away us being able to like proactively manage and know what goes into our own head, because we're just letting other people feed us externally constantly. And so replace it with, have a mantra, have a meditation, have a breath practice, that when you see that urge, you feel your hand go to your pocket to do it. Like, oh, okay, this would be a really good opportunity to do some mindful breathing, to do 3, 4, 7, 8 breaths, and just bring myself back to myself and be really mindful in this moment. And maybe I still decide, look, no, I've been waiting for this email. I need to go check the email because that's urgent. But you're doing it consciously versus unconsciously. So that the unconscious jumping to a device and replacing it with conscious breathing and conscious decision making on, do we want to go to that device?
Yeah. Yeah. Because sometimes you still got to crank through those emails.
Yeah,
but it's not just on autopilot.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a conscious decision. It's just, instead of mindlessly doing it, you're mindfully doing it. It can still be the right answer with any of these things, right? Like, your values might not be my value. All of this, there's no judgment as this is good or bad. I go way back to the beginning, Hamlet. There's neither good nor bad. Our thinking makes it so. It's not good or bad. It's a thing that's happening. And we decide, do we want that thing to be the thing happening or not? Do we want that to be our story or not? And we get to decide. But if we're not proactively deciding, no one else is out there thinking about what our story should be. We're the only people that could possibly do it. And most people go through life not doing it.
Yeah. What's a hope that you would have for Atlanta for the future?
Yeah, I would hope it can just like come together. There's so much we agree on and we want in common. And so much of the conversation ends up being focused on the things that we don't agree on and the differences and why we need to fight about stuff. And if we could just I was having this conversation with someone on, I think people agree on like 70% of stuff, maybe 80%, but all politics is arguing about the other 20%.
Yeah.
And we went to a Malcolm Gladwell event a couple of weeks ago. And the moderator asked him about US politics. Like, oh, what do you think about our divisive politics? This, that, and the other. It's like, well, one, I'm Canadian. So like, I don't get a right to say what I think about your politics. But I would question that it's more polarized now than it was before. I think the disagreement level is the same percent on the same things. It's just now, instead of talking about everything or focusing on the things that we all agree need to get done and doing that, we spend all our time focusing on these things. And so it feels more polarized, but we don't actually disagree any more than we did before. We're just spending all our time. It's kind of the social media thing of 5% of the people create all the noise and the conflict. Like, most people actually don't think like that. It's a very, very small percentage. And so my hope would be reframing the conversation, the mindset, and the engagement with each other of what can we agree on that matters and is important, and let's spend more of our time working to achieve those things than arguing about the things that we can't agree on.
Yeah. Yeah. Andrew, thank you very much for spending the time.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Rooting for you, rooting for Lively.
Thank you.
We'll be out on the lookout. All right. That's our show today. Thank you, Andrew, very much for the time. Thank you for listening and journeying with Macon Atlanta. As always, the goal is better living in the AI era, and how do we help each other to live well and be well. I appreciate all of your thoughts, comments, reflections. If you like this, please leave a comment. Let me know what you thought about the episode. Please share it with somebody who else you think would enjoy it. And let me know if there's any questions that you have or anybody you want to hear on the podcast for a future episode. Thank you all. Have a great weekend.